welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the first of our Drilling Deeper webinar series. My name is John Forwood. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of the Lowell Resources Fund, and it's great to be here today to see this concept come to life. I'm delighted to welcome our first ever guest, the legendary gold and nickel explorer, Dr. Mark Bennett. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, John.
I'll give you a bit of a run through of Mark's CV in a sec, but before I do that, just quickly as an intro, why are we holding these webinars, the Drilling Deeper series? One of the main reasons is we believe there's few better ways to make huge and rapid profits than when investing through a major mineral discovery. We want to get as many insights as we possibly can into what creates a big discovery and what tips investors can use to get behind the next one. The junior resources is the best place to do this, so we want to help shed light on some of the hidden treasures and remarkable stories, share knowledge to further industry connection and learning, and ultimately, we're trying to improve investment decision making. So any questions you've got during the webinar, please use the Q&A button. So let's get on with it. Mark Bennett, I won't go through your entire illustrious career, but rather outline a few highlights as a precursor to our chat. Mark is a PhD qualified geo with a 35-year career across 11 countries. He's a two-time recipient of the AMEC Prospector of the Year Award for discovering the Thunderbox and Waterloo gold deposits in 2002 and the Nova Bollinger nickel copper mines in 2013. So, Mark, by my calculation, that's one a decade, and you're just about due for the next one around about now.
Yep.
Mark was also involved in discovering the Wahgnion gold mine in Burkina Faso, the Waterloo gold mine in WA, and the Bollinger gold deposit in Finland. Mark is currently executive chairman of S2 Resources, which was a spin-out of the original Sirius, and is passionate about leadership and culture in exploration. Welcome, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, John, for that wrap.
Just before we start, I should say this is not providing any investment advice. But first question to you, Mark. How and why did you get into geology? What's just a quick history of what got you into cracking rocks?
It started before I can actually remember. At the age of about 4, I think, I was interested in all of the usual things that young kids are interested in, sort of space, dinosaurs, volcanoes. So, it was just rocks. From then.
Yes. And then you went to uni in the UK and also did a PhD in the UK.
Yeah, I didn't get the right qualifications to do geology at uni, but I managed to sneak in thanks to a sympathetic prof at Leicester University. Then did a year working in Australia on a visa, and there were no jobs. Then went back to the UK and did a PhD. Then finished that, and there were no jobs again. So I sort of bummed around doing various contracts until I could sneak back to Australia.
And you've said that you learnt most of the important things during a stint with the famous Western Mining Company. What were your jobs there, and what were the most important things you learned during that time?
Well, when I got there, literally I was given a desk and a bunch of projects and thrown in at the deep end. So I had to go out and learn how to manage them and learn the rocks all over again, because in WA everything's deeply weathered and I'd never seen things like that. So it was sort of jack of all trades from day one. But the thing about WMC was I think there was best part of 200 geologists employed around the company, and they had what was called a guild. So all of the different geos in different regions looking at different things, exploration and mining, would get together regularly and sort of cross-fertilise. And that was where you learnt a lot of stuff, and there were a lot of really good sort of experts of various sorts that you could work with too. So that, together with their emphasis on doing training courses of various sorts, just gave me an education for 8 years that was just 10 times bigger than you could possibly learn at uni.
And Mark, I think you might have you got a few slides to share of your time during those WMC years, or those early years? But Western Mining obviously was a big company, and you've since moved into small companies. But what were the positives and negatives in working for a big organisation?
Yeah, I've got a few slides to share. This was actually taken in 1981 when I was doing that year on a visitor's visa, working for North Broken Hill up near Burke, and my exploration manager was Ian Plimer. When I didn't really know much about rocks, and on the weekends I off-sided on a drill rig for Aberfoyle, drilling out a tin tungsten prospect called Doradilla in New South Wales. So yeah, that was a bit of an adventure. That sort of made me want to come back to Australia.
Health and safety's moved on a bit since then.
Oh, it sure has. Yeah. So yeah, working for Western Mining, it initially based out of Kalgoorlie. That's when my hair was a different colour, and used to do mapping and things like that, which is a bit of a lost art these days. So learnt a fair bit about that. We were the first people out drilling on salt lakes undercover, I think. We had lake rigs and these little buggies, but we used to spend more time digging ourselves out of bogs rather than drilling holes, I think, in hindsight. So yeah, latterly, after working in WA, Roy Woodall decided WMC needed to get a bit more international. So he recruited various people to go to different parts of the world and sniff out opportunities. So I was it for West Africa back in the mid-90s, and we were prowling around Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Ghana, and in this particular case, Mauritania. So we were there when all the Canadian juniors were there looking for opportunities, but for various other reasons, WMC didn't take one of those. And since then, West Africa's become one of the biggest sort of gold producing areas globally, and had a few adventures along the way as well. That was I mentioned this the other night at the AusIMM students' evening, but in Burkina Faso, there's a little village. The local religion in that place is voodoo, and they have sacred crocodiles which they feed with chickens. So they lure crocodiles out the lake with a chicken on the end of a string, and that's the chicken's feet sticking out the crocodile's mouth. And the local guys said, "Come on, what you do is you sit on the crocodile whilst it's eating the chicken. Just remember to get off before it finishes." So after a bit of persuasion, I did, and they took the photo. Then I said, "Okay, your turn." And they said, "You must be kidding. Only stupid white fellas would do that sort of thing." Learned a lot. Worked with people like Tim O'Driscoll, Douglas Haynes. Chris Bonwick was my first boss who set up IGO. So yeah, just got the benefit of a lot of wisdom from a lot of different people. But that was fantastic. We used to call it the University of Western Mining because of what we would learn. But after a while in a big organisation, there tends to be a bit of a logjam as you sort of get up the tree, and there was very few opportunities and a fair bit of bureaucracy in decision making, which led to a bit of frustration. So that's what sort of tempted me to go down the food chain a bit into a smaller company where you can make a bit more of a difference and be a bit more nimble.
And that network, some of those names you mentioned, obviously Chris Bonwick setting up IGO, that network is obviously, very powerful. The alumni of Western Mining in particular, many of them have gone on to very big things. But, the Nova Bollinger discovery ended up being bought by, IGO. So, that network obviously, stood you in good stead.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's still alive and kicking now.
You've mentioned that, your first board role, and I'm not quite sure where that was, but was a terrible experience, but a great learning experience. Perhaps you don't have to tell us where that was, but tell us some of the things that you learned in that role.
Yeah, well, so post WMC, I joined a small company called Forestania Gold, which was immediately taken over by a TSX listed company called Lion Ore. And we sort of grew that from a small company that was, I think, about 40 million market cap. And it ended up getting sold to Norilsk for 7.6 billion. After that, I was invited onto the board of the company you're talking about. And I was the exploration director. And, it was a case of a company probably biting off more than it can chew, and a number of commercial things forcing people to make unwise decisions. And when I say commercial things, I mean things like hedging or other sort of fancy derivatives that can get you into trouble if you're not careful. The main thing I learned about that was really the board is really important. The board's got to be composed of the right people with open communication. If you've got a dysfunctional board or sort of factions within the board, you spend more time dealing with that than actually doing what you're meant to be doing for the company and the shareholders. And I think the other thing was the temptation to over-promote things and over-promise, which inevitably leads to disappointment. And it's much better to take it on the chin short term and sort of earn the credentials such that people will actually believe what you say when you say something. And that was actually reflected in the early days of Sirius after the discovery of Nova. My first meeting in Sydney with a group of fund managers, there was about 12 of them around the table, and I gave a presentation, and at the end of it there was this long pregnant pause, and one of the guys said, you're from Perth, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, but you don't appear to be lying. And then they sort of followed up by saying, you've got a good news story, but it's not always good news. So what we appreciate is a straight bat and being told things objectively. And yes, sometimes things won't be as good, but if we feel that we can trust what's being said, then we're much more likely to stick with you than not. And I think that's a very important lesson.
Indeed, yeah. Handling shareholders is always tricky, but yeah, much honesty is the best policy. I think you got a few slides on it, but love to just to quickly talk about the story. Some of the keys to the Nova Bollinger discovery, the history leading up to it, how the company was really almost down to its last dollar. And had a geophysical anomaly that looked too good to be true, but did spend the last of its remaining reserves on drilling that hole. So perhaps you could just quickly walk us through that.
It was a close run thing, as the Duke of Wellington said. Funnily enough, as was Thunderbox previously, and it surprises me how often I hear similar stories. It sort of you get to the brink of desperation before things come good. So,
do you think just on that? Do you think geologists work best when they're got a very very shoestring budget and they have to make sure that their holes are the best targets they've ever drilled?
Yeah, I do, because in the case of when I was at Lowell and we made the Thunderbox discovery. Prior to that, the company had very little money. It had the Bounty gold mine, and it was losing money. Rothschilds, who were the bankers, were hovering. So I spent the best part of 2 years out bush up near Leinster in a tent, primarily on my own, just prowling around, not drilling much, just putting the pieces together. And I think it was that time that sort of led to the discovery of Thunderbox. And in that case, we only had 2 lines of RAB that we could drill that I sort of designed to straddle where we thought this particular shear zone might go undercover. So there were no indications of what might be there. The strongest soil anomaly was 4 ppb. But we drilled them, and it was we basically drilled 2 lines with about 20 holes on each line. The last 2 holes on the second line we couldn't get to because there was a creek in flood, but we found a way around it. And those 2 holes had sniffs of gold in, which led us into drilling the next round, which became the discovery. So without that persistence and all that time gestating, it may never have happened. And Don Bailey, the chairman of Lionel, said that the day we found Thunderbox, he had more money in his pocket than the company had in its bank account. So it's just scary how things can turn on a dime, literally.
And similar story at Nova.
Yeah, we set Sirius up Mark Creasy vended in a lot of his private ground into what was the shell of Croesus Mining, and we renamed it Sirius. And we raised roughly $10 million, and we said we'll give ourselves 3 years to find something and do or die trying. And it was that mentality that sort of saw us put money in the ground rather than conserve it just to preserve our jobs. But it got to literally 2 years and 11 months of the 3 years and the last $100,000 or so that we decided to drill an EM anomaly that, as you said, looked too good to be true, with basically the last 3 holes that we could afford to drill ever. We agonized over where to stick them because we had a geophysical anomaly that was modeled to be in a particular position, and if we were too far one way, we would overshoot. If we were too far the other way, we wouldn't reach. So we agonized over that. We drilled the holes, and the second hole of the 3 was the one that actually was the discovery hole. But it was a close run thing.
So Mark, what, those 2 discoveries, and obviously, 99 out of 100 prospects are dusters, and you've got to move on. But what are the key lessons you have learned, from your successes and your failures over the years?
Oh, it's a whole raft of things, really, and a lot of contradictory things, I guess. In exploration, you've got to be an optimist. Otherwise, you wouldn't even get out of bed. But if you're too optimistic, you fail to make the hard decisions, and you can throw good money after bad. So it's trying to strike a balance between being optimistic and being analytical and ruthless enough to know when to pull up stumps and move on and live to fight another day. And too often people find it hard to make those decisions. People put a lot of personal investment and reputational investment into promoting a particular project, for example, and then to turn around and say, oh, there's nothing there, it's no good, we're moving on, is hard for people to do, both to themselves, to their boards, and to shareholders. So being able to do that is one of the key things, I think, is to keep moving forward, keep surviving without sort of destroying the capital structure of the company along the way, so that you've got a chance to find the next one.
Yeah. And you've talked quite a lot about creativity in exploration, and a geologist once said to me, mines are made, not found. How do you foster, creativity and if you like, out of the box thinking that's going to find, something new and make a discovery that, has been overlooked in the past?
Yeah, that's a good point. It is a creative process, and I think sometimes in a peculiar way, the fact that I didn't have just pure science qualifications to get into uni, I had arts subjects as well, made me think a bit more broadly than and less logically than you need to sometimes, and I think that's helped. And it's as much an art of a science. Also, there's a big difference, I think, between mining geology and exploration geology. You find different personality types are attracted to each sort of discipline, where mining is more purely logical, linear thinking, process driven, whereas exploration, because there's a lack of data, you need to be imaginative. You need to be able to join very few dots and test things without having the confidence in terms of data richness to necessarily be sure about it. And I think the more creative you are, the easier it is to do, and the more comfortable you are doing it. And I think in the case of it started with Lion Ore, really, and then through Sirius, and now with S2. The people we have in the team, they've been in 4 different companies now, and we're all eccentrics in one way or another, and would probably find it difficult to get employed by sensible people. But it works.
Good. Can you perhaps tell us a little bit about your activities in S2 and a couple of the projects that are getting you excited at the moment?
Yeah, sure. We've, after Sirius, we sort of reset and became a grassroots explorer again. And we had an advantage in that the S2 shareholders are primarily ex-Sirius shareholders. So they've sort of reaped the rewards of that approach. And we've got quite a number of, investment funds on the register. And for them, their stake in us is fairly trivial in terms of their portfolio. So they're prepared to give us enough rope to hang ourselves, basically. Let us go out and do the slightly wackier, longer term things and more strategic things that you need to do if you're going to find something new and big, rather than just sort of go with the crowd and drill in the shadow of the head frame. So I'm not saying that can't be successful, because there's some pretty good examples of that being successful, but we go out there and basically, with the support of a good share register, look for things that are going to move the dial. So that basically has led us into places like Nevada, Sweden, Finland. We're all back in Australia at the moment, not necessarily by design. That's just how where we found ourselves. And we've got a number of projects around the country. Most of them are very early stage. We spent most of 2024 assembling them and getting approvals to get on the ground one way or another. So right now we're literally, as we speak, drilling north of the Fosterville gold mine on the same structures that host the Swan Zone and so on at Fosterville. We're also about to drill another hole at a porphyry target in New South Wales called Glenlogan, which has a nice geophysical anomaly over it in virgin country. We have some interesting looking soil anomalies over in the West Murchison in WA, which are sort of akin to the Julimar style targets that the Chalice sort of reset the dial with a few years back. And over in northern New South Wales near Burke, which is where that photo of me as a student was taken, we've, funnily enough, found ourselves back there, and we're going to be drilling a bunch of interesting looking gravity and magnetic anomalies undercover there. So that's an unusual one in that it's undercover and there's so little data. You can be accused of being dumb by going around drilling magnetic and gravity anomalies without any other sort of information as to what they might be, because anything can cause those. But unless you're prepared to look, you're not going to find. So as part of our spread of projects, that's what we've got in the mix as well. Drilling
deeper. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Audience, please send through your questions. There's one here talking about S2. You mentioned Fosterville, and the question is, what differentiated S2 resources over every other gold producer and explorer in the world, including Agnico Eagle, to be awarded 3 of the 4 Fosterville exploration licenses? That certainly was very hot ground, and I think you were a bit surprised to win it.
Oh, look, we were amazed. We put in bids for 3 of the 4 blocks, including the Cherry, which is the one that surrounds the mine, Block 4. And we thought we might have a slim chance of getting one of the more peripheral ones. The process took quite a while, so we'd almost sort of written it off or forgotten about it by the time we heard. And then one Thursday evening, one of our guys, Marcus Staubman, got a phone call from the Victorian government saying, "Oh, you've won one of the blocks in the tenders." And he said, "What tender?" And then he said, "Oh, yeah, which one?" And they said, "Block 4." And we fell off our chairs, really. And the government were putting out an announcement about it the next day, so we had to scramble to get an ASX announcement ready, which we did. And then we spent, the next 18 months scratching our heads, wondering how we could do that, because we heard through various channels that some of the big guys had put in some fairly big numbers into those tender applications. And it wasn't really until about 12 months after we got to find out why that was. And it was, interestingly, because of our ESG credentials, ultimately. So 55% of the weighting of that tender was based on your work program and how much you were going to spend. 45% was based on ESG stuff, and 25% was traditional owner vote. From what we can gather, the traditional owners, the Dja Dja Wurrung and the Tongarong, basically put their support behind us because of what we'd done as serious previously elsewhere in terms of involving the traditional owners in the process. And it was that sort of got us over the line. A bit like the Eurovision Song Contest, when one country awards all its votes to its mates over the border.
Great. Look, I don't know if we're going to get to all these questions, but the next one is regarding Glenlogan. Asked if it's a duster, this deep hole, will that be the decision point of the hard, quote unquote, hard decision?
Yeah, look, potentially. I don't want to sort of preempt what might happen because we've got a joint venture partner there that we have to think about as well. But our style is we have an idea or a target. We test it. If that doesn't work out, then we're prepared to move on. In this case at Glenlogan, we drilled an initial hole. It didn't find what we hoped, but it led us to this point where we are now doing geophysics and getting a pretty good anomaly that we'll test. So if we drill this and the hole goes where it's supposed to and we test that geophysical anomaly and there's no goods there, then there's just no justifiable rationale for us to keep poking around. If there's encouragement there, then we'll stay. And in that case, the sort of target we're looking for, we're using the pre-discovery hole at Ridgeway as a sort of template for what we might want to see. And, the discovery hole at Ridgeway was spectacular, but the hole drilled prior to that, I think hit something like 100 metres at 0.1% copper and 0.1 or 0.2 of a gram gold, with the usual sort of alteration you get around a porphyry. So if we had sniffs of something like that, we'd be encouraged that we were in the vicinity of something and probably poke another hole or two in like Newcrest did back in the day at Ridgeway. But if we drill the guts of that geophysical anomaly and we don't get those sorts of encouraging signs, then it makes sense to not spend any more money there.
Well, yeah, Ridgeway is definitely a prize worth chasing. So best of luck. Look, this next question is probably take a day to answer, but I'll give you 30 seconds. How are you going with land access? Is this a major factor in exploration these days?
It's a huge factor in exploration. 10, 15 years ago, it was just a part of what you did. These days, it's a major part. And I think it's gone from, taking up 10% of our time to 25% of our time. Whether that be, traditional owners or private landowners, you have to put a lot of work in these days. Everybody has become much more self-aware and there's a lot more activist groups stirring pots as well on the sidelines. So it just slows things down. You've got to be really respectful and mindful that you're on other people's land, whether it's farmers or Aboriginals, and that's fine. I think that's right. You really have to factor it into what you do now. And that's why we have a number of projects, because it takes time to earn people's trust and get people to sign agreements to let you on the ground. And if you're not prepared to do that, if you're too pushy, it'll blow up in your face. So you have to do it that way, which means if you want to be doing things and having news flow, then you need to have a number of projects on the go at any one time.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible portfolio approach to, as these things get access granted, you can go and get on the ground and drill them, but sometimes you don't know how long it's going to take. Look, we better keep moving in the interest of time. So the next segment in the webinar is just to talk a little bit about the markets. And as we've been chatting about the Nova Bollinger discovery, which was a nickel copper discovery, and interesting, that project has been mined, has been a really profitable operation for IGO over the last 10 or so years, as I understand it, coming to the end of its mine life towards the end of this year. So pretty topical and a wonderful discovery. But I thought we might just talk a little bit about nickel. The market, here we can see the last 10 years of various commodity returns. You can see that nickel price has jumped around a fair bit relative to other commodities. And at the moment, it is sort of settling back to much more into its long-term price level of around 16,000 US dollars a ton. The big factor that we have seen is Indonesia coming into the market, and the new technology from China that has enabled lateritic nickel ores to be processed into battery grade nickel. And Indonesia now supplies more than 50% of the world's nickel through these type of deposits. And that's forecast to be maintained, if not slightly increase over the next few years. So that's really had a massive effect on the nickel price. It has been interesting, though, that nickel is a historically very volatile metal in terms of price. But it has been interesting that it's come off a lot since the early days of COVID. When Elon Musk was saying, "Oh, please go and mine me some more nickel." He was desperate for nickel for his EVs, and the Indonesians obviously responded in spades. And then people were saying, "Well, we need to have sulfide nickel because that's much greener than lateritic nickel," and that is definitely the case. But obviously, a number of off-takers not particularly concerned about the source of their nickel, and the Indonesian nickel certainly is less environmentally friendly from a number of aspects than high-grade sulfide nickel like Nova Bollinger. In terms of the demand, still dominantly steel, specialty steels, and stainless steel make up 70% of demand, but battery usage, as per EVs, is certainly growing. I think we can see increasing demand for nickel out of Indonesia, which is obviously more than the OPEC of nickel. It's probably 3 times or 4 times the OPEC of nickel if you equate the market dominance of Indonesia. We can see some pullbacks, if you like, in terms of restrictions on mining licenses, concerns about depleting their reserves too quickly. So I think we are going to see some strengthening in the nickel price, perhaps over the midterm and maybe over the longer term. But Mark, a question for you. Having a lot of experience in WA nickel, do you think the WA nickel industry, particularly after the closure of Nickel West last year, do you think it's got a life in the future, or have we seen it? Is it a sunset industry?
I think there's a few different sort of pigeonholes within WA. So, all of the companies that were reliant on the BHP processing facilities are in a tricky spot. So a lot of those smaller deposits clustered around Kambalda and Leinster will be difficult to operate. The bigger mines, I think, will always be there. And it's, I think, quality rather than quantity. And that price chart you showed of the nickel price, I hear a lot of people bemoaning the nickel price, but it's still more than it was when we found Nova, and indeed when Nova came into production.
Correct.
What's changed more is the cost base. The cost base has gone up a lot, I think, in WA with shortage of labour and skilled labour and capital costs and so on as well. So that's, I think, the big problem for WA is the cost of production rather than what's in the ground. I think it'll be difficult to get back to the glory days without that BHP sort of network in place. So it's going to take another big standalone discovery to revitalise things in Western Australia and sort of reinstill confidence as well. That was, that's why I think in its day Nova made such a big splash. Is it was so outrageously robust in every metric, whether it be purely financial or the shape and the way you could mine it, or the type of concentrate it produced that made it a very, very sought after product. That's what we're needing, not sort of a dozen little mines feeding into the concentrator at Kambalda.
Yeah. And if you can find a project that's not just nickel, it has some credits with copper, like Nova Bollinger, and or gold or PGMs, then you've got a lot of byproduct credits which can really support the project.
Yeah, and there's an emerging trend in Canada now of companies describing their nickel copper PGE deposits as polymetallic deposits to avoid using the N word.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, indeed. Okay, and look, I think we might have just a little bit of time. Gold is obviously extremely topical at the moment. We can just perhaps jump. Here we go. Yep. Obviously, Trump has been, the gold price has responded to the Trump presidency very positively. But what I sort of wanted to point out with this slide is that the gold price has been on a very powerful upward move, and this is US dollars in the yellow-brown line there, really for well over 2 years, so well ahead of the current US administration. So while the current situation, particularly with tariffs and the uncertainty over global financial markets, is positive for gold, I think the underlying trend, in particular driven by de-dollarization and central bank buying, is something that is broader than just that situation. So Mark, everyone's got a view on gold, and I know you have a reasonable strong focus on gold in the S2 portfolio. What's any thoughts in terms of the market? I guess one thing we should say is that despite the gold price being so strong and at $5,000 Aussie an ounce, we haven't seen equities react with the leverage that they normally would. Share prices haven't reacted, and we're certainly expecting to see them react with more money being made by the gold producers.
Yeah, what you said about that longer term trend is spot on. Gold is already looking pretty good because of some of the sort of macro fundamentals of what interest rates were doing, and money printing and in the US and so on. But all the geopolitical tensions that have come around in the last 18 months or 2 years or whatever have just added fuel to the fire. And I think the advent of Trump's Liberation Day is like the final sort of ingredient for gold to potentially do something that it hasn't done since 1980 or whenever it was.
Yeah, look, the halcyon days of WA gold back in the early 80s, they were pretty exciting times. So hopefully we're going to see them again. I think we've just got time for one last question, and this one's about the biggest impact, or what's the metal that's had the most response, if you like, or tariff impact on it. Look, I think that's still being worked through. There's still a lot of uncertainty as to what's happening with metals and tariff. And apparently Trump is looking at metals in terms of tariff policy separately to his announcement yesterday. So I think there's some more to come there. But in terms of sort of the big picture, I think tariffs are generally accepted as having a negative effect on global financial or economic growth, I should say. And so I guess things like perhaps iron ore, which are perhaps more directly related to global economic growth, might be in an indirect way more impacted by tariffs than other things such as gold, which actually looks to be responding positively. So look, Mark, any last comments? We're going to have to wrap it up very shortly, and it's been a fantastic discussion. Really enjoyed all your insights, but anything further from you?
Oh, no, I think that's great, John. The next few days and weeks are going to be pretty interesting in terms of what you were just talking about. There's so many moving parts and knock-on effects in that matrix that it's really difficult to try and figure what's going to affect what down the chain. But yeah, I'm glad that we're exploring for gold.
Yeah, I think, the volatility is definitely positive for gold.
Yeah.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much. I need to thank Boyd Peters and Bridget Tompkins very much for helping to set up this first webinar. Thank you to everyone who's attended online, live, in person. Great to see a really good turnout. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me at the address in the chat. And this webinar has been recorded. It will be available online shortly on YouTube. We do have a poll, I think, coming up now. If you'd like to respond to that, please do. And finally, please, if you're interested, put the next webinar in your diary. Registration isn't open yet, but the next webinar will be the first Friday in May at the same time, 12 noon AEST. And the special guest is Tony Rivera, formerly of Azure Minerals, and he's going to talk about the Cosmo nickel discovery and the more recent Andover lithium discovery. And we'll be drilling a little bit deeper into current lithium markets at that time. So, Mark, thank you very much once again. Really appreciate your time. It's been fabulous. And thank you to everyone for attending.